They called her the Shepherd Widow, a name folks hung on a thing they were glad they were not. On a hard, bright October morning in 1874, with the wind scouring down off the high grass of central Kansas and the sky the thin-washed blue of a fall that had forgotten how to rain, Ada Merrick stood at the edge of her grazing ground and watched her flock move. Some 90 head of cream and gray sheep flowed over the short green nap she kept cropped close around her soddy, their soft feet whispering in grass they had eaten down to a finger length of living turf. She held her crook loose in a hand gone chapped and brown at the knuckles, and her chin sat level as it had learned to sit. And she never looked up when the fine cattle rig came rolling by on the section line. It rolled by without slowing. She heard the driver say something to the man beside him, low, and then she heard them both laugh, and the laugh carried back to her down the cold wind long after the wheels had gone. She did not turn her head. She had learned to let a laugh go past her like weather, and if she practiced it enough, most days it did not leave a mark. Prairie Ford would not let her forget what she was. Sheep were the lowest thing a body could run in that country, a woolly poor man's beast that ruined the range and marked their keeper as something beneath the cattle families and the wheat families both. Her husband Tom had died 2 winters back of a lung fever that took him in 9 days, and he had left her the flock and the soddy and the crook, and the town had watched to see how long a woman would last alone with 90 sheep before she sold out and went back east where woolies and widows belonged. She had not sold out. That was the thing they could not forgive her. She grazed the flock in careful rotation, as Tom had grazed them and as the old herders had grazed since there were sheep and grass in the world. She moved them from strip to strip, so the ground behind them was always eaten down close and green, and the ground before them stood tall and waiting, and she never let them ruin a patch by standing on it too long. It was patient work and humble work, and it kept her ground looking, to a proud man's eye, like the shabbiest claim in the county, no tall proud grass, no fine standing hay, just the short crop nap the sheep left behind them like the pile on a worn rug. If you are new here, settle in and stay a while, and if a story like this warms you, let me know down in the comments. This is one worth staying for, because here is the thing Prairie Ford scorned, and the thing every old herder knew in his bones and never bothered to say out loud. A flock turns grass no plow ever broke into wool for a man's back and mutton for his table and a little sharp cheese for the winter. One small woman can herd sheep across ground where a big team and a wagon would break her in a week. And a strip of turf grazed down hard to the dirt will not carry fire. The flames run to it and find nothing left to burn and lie down and go out, right there where the sheep have been. That was not a story Ada told anyone. There was no one to tell it to. It was only the quiet truth she kept as she kept everything else, close and level and to herself. It was in the Mercantile, 4 days before the wind changed, that Amos Deer said out loud what the whole town said behind its hand. Ida had come in for salt and a paper of needles, and she was counting her coins onto the counter when the cattleman came through the door behind her with the cold morning coming in off his coat. Amos Deer ran 400 head on the good grass south of town, and he was a widower raising 2 small children since the diphtheria took his wife. And he was a big, clean-jawed man used to a room going quiet and respectful when he entered it. He did not lower his voice for her. That was the whole of the cruelty. He meant it to carry. Now there, he said, to the counter, and the 2 men leaning on it, and the storekeep and the whole bright morning, there is a woman who ought to be told a hard thing for her own good. The storekeep looked at his hands. Ada kept counting her coins. A woman running woolies on cattle and wheat ground, Dear went on, warming to it, has no more business here than a hog in a church pew. Those filthy things crop the grass to the dirt and foul the water and leave a stink a mile downwind. She ought to sell the whole woolly lot for tallow and grease before she ruins the range for her betters. There's men in this county trying to build something, ma'am, something that'll last. And you're grazing it down to nothing with a flock of poor man's mutton. One of the men at the counter laughed the short laugh of a man who is glad the hard thing is being said to someone else. Ada slid her coins across the wood and took up her salt. My grass grows back, Mr. Dear, she said, and her voice came out steady and even, nothing performed in it. Every blade. That's what grass is made to do. Your grass, Dear said, is a disgrace to look at. A body doesn't run a country on how it looks, Mr. Dear, she said. He runs it on what keeps. You keep yours tall and proud, and you'll have it right up to the day something comes wanting it. I keep mine short and homely, and it'll still be here when the wanting's done. Wanting from what? Laughed the man at the counter. There ain't a cloud in the sky to send it anywhere. That's the trouble with a clear sky, Ada said. Every man stands under it like it owes him a favor. Dear laughed then, not unkindly, which was somehow the worse of the two. Well, would you listen? He said to the room. The shepherd widow preaching weather to cattlemen. Ma'am, you tend your woolies and let the men that own this country tend the country. I mean to tend them, Ada said. It's alive, my grass. Which is more than a body can say for grass that's only standing there waiting on a dry year. And she picked up her needles and walked out past him into the cold, and she kept her chin level clear to the wagon. And she did not let the mark show until she was a mile down the section line with no one to see it. She did not know, saying it, how near the dry year already stood, for the rain had quit that fall the way a stubborn thing quits, all at once and for good. It had been a hard country already. The summer before had brought the grasshoppers. The great gray clouds of them that came down out of a clear sky and ate the corn to the stalk, and the stalk to the ground, and the very handles of the hoes where the sweat had soaked in. Prairie Ford had gone into the winter thin and gone into the spring thinner, and everyone had said, well, the rains will come, and the grass will come, and we'll make it back. And the grass had come, tall and thick and grateful, standing waist high and higher on every proud claim in the county. Then, in September, the rain simply stopped. It did not storm and clear. It did not threaten and pass. The sky went that thin high blue and stayed there, and the wind came out of the south dry as an oven mouth. And the tall, grateful grass that had come up so thick began to cure where it stood. Green to gold, and gold to the pale, dead straw of a thing that has given its water up to the air. By the middle of October, the whole country stood cured to hay on the stem, waist high on every fine claim, dry clear through, waiting. The church prayed for rain. Ada did not go to that church any more, had not gone since the church women took to gathering their skirts and stepping wide of her at the mercantile. But she heard the preacher had prayed for rain 3 Sundays running, and that the third Sunday he had prayed a little differently, with a catch in his voice, as a man prays when he has begun to be afraid. Ada moved her flock and watched her ground, and said nothing. Where the sheep had grazed, the turf stayed short and stayed the faintest living green, drawing up what little the deep roots could still find. Everywhere else the country stood tall and dead and gold, and the warm wind combed through it, and it made a dry hissing sound like something whispering a word it did not want overheard. On the fourth day the wind swung round harder out of the south, and by noon there was smoke on the horizon. It came up faint at first, a dirty smudge low in the south, and a body could tell himself it was only dust. Somebody said afterward it was a burn gone wrong 10 miles out, a man clearing a fire break of his own, and the hot south wind had taken it out of his hands as that wind would take anything out of a man's hands that day. By the middle of the afternoon, it was not a smudge any more. It was a line. It was a low churning line all across the southern sky, and the color drained up out of the day above it, blue to white, to a sick copper gold, and the sun hung in it like a coin at the bottom of a dirty pail. And then the town could hear it, a low, steady roar that was not thunder and did not stop, growing under the wind, closer than the smoke had any right to be. A prairie fire in cured waist-high grass, driven by a hot south wind, will run faster than a horse can gallop. It does not creep. It comes on in a wall, and the wall throws its own wind before it. And the tall, dead grass on every proud claim from the fire to the town stood there like a fuse laid straight to the roofs. Prairie Ford came apart as a proud place comes apart when it is suddenly afraid. Men ran for wet sacks and plow teams. Women carried children and clocks and quilts out into the section road as if the road were somewhere safe. And the church women, the same women who had gathered their skirts from the shepherd widow, stood in the road and cried out that the fire was a judgment on the town for its sins. Amos Deer was a horse before most men had their teams hitched. He rode south to the edge of his own grass to see what he was facing, and what he saw stopped his heart in him. His tall, proud range, 400 acres of the finest cured grass in the county, stood square between the fire and his house. And his house stood with his 2 children in it, his boy of 6 and his girl of 4, motherless already. And between the wall of flame and his babies there was nothing, nothing green, nothing grazed, nothing but the tall gold grass he had been so proud of, 400 acres of it, dry as tinder and lit already at the far edge, going up in a sheet with a sound like a great cloth tearing. He wheeled his horse and rode for the house. And he carried the children out and put them in the wagon with a hired girl and sent them north up the road, and the little girl was coughing in the smoke that had come down over everything now, a hard barking cough he heard over the roar until the wagon was gone. And then Amos Deer sat his horse in his own dooryard with his fine range burning toward it and understood, all at once and too late, that there was exactly one piece of ground in the whole south of the county that the fire could not cross. It was the shepherd widow's ground, the close-cropped turf the sheep had eaten down, the shabby grazed strip he had called a disgrace 4 days ago in the bright, safe morning at the Mercantile. He did not think about it long. There was not long to think. He spurred his horse north and west across the section lines, with the smoke chasing him and the copper light climbing, and he came up her lane at a dead run and hauled the horse down at her gate. She was already out. Of course she was already out. She had the flock bunched and moving, 90 head pouring like gray water toward the last strip of standing grass between the town and the fire. And she was behind them with her crook and her dog, working the far flank, pushing them on to the tall dead grass to eat it down before the flame got there. She had seen the smoke before the town had. She had not waited to be asked. Deer came off his horse before it had stopped. He was a big, proud man, and he had never in his life stood where he stood now. And he took off his hat because his hands did not know what else to do with themselves, and he crushed it in both of them against his chest, and the words that came out of him were the words that pride had made unaskable 4 days before. Can your sheep stop the fire? She did not stop moving. She did not turn it into anything. She looked at him over the backs of the flock, and the copper light was on her face, and she answered him as she had answered him in the store, steady and even, nothing performed. They've got half of it ate down already, she said, have had for 2 years, only nobody looked. Get your men off the wet sacks and onto the section line. Bring every team that can pull a plow and every man that can swing a wet sack and put them where I put them, and do what I say when I say it. Can you do that, Mr. Deer? Can you take telling from the shepherd widow? I can, he said. His voice cracked on it. God help me, I can. Then get them, she said, and get back here. We've got till the wind holds, and not a minute the other side of it. He was already turning for his horse. The town's on the wet sacks, he called back. The preacher's got them wetting sacks in the horse trough like that'll turn a wall of fire. A wet sack turns a fire that's already lain down, she said. It won't turn one that's standing up and running. Get 'em off the sacks and onto the ground. The ground's the only thing that ever turned a prairie fire in the history of the world, Mr. Deer, and I've got the only ground for 10 miles that'll do it. Now ride. What happened over the next 2 hours, Prairie Ford told for 40 years after, and the bones of it never changed. She put the flock on the last standing grass between the settlement and the flame, and she grazed a firebreak in the failing light. 90 head, driven back and forth across a widening strip, cropping the tall dead stalks down to the dirt and the living root as fast as their soft mouths could take it, while she and her dog turned them and turned them again. And the wall of fire came on in the south, throwing its red light up under the copper sky. And where the flock could not eat fast enough, she set them in. Amos Deer came back with a dozen men and 4 plow teams, and he did not lead them. He put himself under her hand like the greenest hired boy on the place, and he learned to work the flank at her word before the whole town. Not there, she called to him across the roar, you'll split the flock and lose the half of them into the fire. Come round behind. Turn them by walking, not by shouting. A sheep runs from a shout and walks from a body. Behind them, man, and lean into them slow. And Amos Deer, who ran 400 head and had never taken an order from a soul, put his big body behind the flock and leaned into 90 sheep slow and walking, and turned them onto the next strip, and did it again, and again with the ash falling on his good range coat, and his fine cattleman's name tied now, in front of every witness in the county, to the shepherd widow's mercy. The plow's next. She called, break me a furrow along the eat-down edge, 3 deep, turn the sod up raw. Grass they've grazed, dirt where they haven't, and a wet sack man every 10 feet. Move. One of the men stood staring south at the wall of it, not moving, and his voice came out high and cracked. It's coming too fast, ma'am. It'll be over us before we've cut a rod of it. It won't hold. It'll hold where they've ate, Ada said, and she did not raise her voice, and that was what made the man look at her. Trust the sheep, not your eyes. Your eyes'll tell you a wall of fire can't lie down, and your eyes are wrong, and they've been wrong about a good many things in this country. Get on the line. You heard her, Deer said. And there was a thing in his voice none of them had heard from him before. Every word she says, you do it, and you do it like she's paying you. She's saving your house, man. Get on the line. And the men moved. The plows tore the raw earth up along the grazed strip, black and wet and dead as a road, and the men strung out along it with their sacks soaking in the last of the water. And behind them stood the town, and the church, and the roofs. Then the fire came. It came the last quarter-mile in a rush, a wall of it, roaring, throwing its own hot wind ahead, so that the men had to turn their faces from it, and it hit the tall grass at the edge of her ground, and stood up 30 feet tall and screaming, and then it hit the grazed green. And it lay down. It ran into the short green nap the sheep had eaten, and it found nothing left to burn, and the wall that had run faster than a horse could gallop faltered and dropped and broke apart into a black crawl of little flames guttering along the ground for want of anything to feed on. It hit the raw furrow and stopped dead. And the men who had stood there sick with fear whipped the little crawling flames out with their wet sacks, walking the line, stamping and beating, and the great roar broke up into the ordinary hiss and crackle of a fire that has been beaten. And up the south wind, faint, a body could hear the flock still cropping in the dark. The man who had said it would not hold stood in the raw furrow with his sack gone slack in his hands, staring at the black crawl where the wall had been. It lay down, he said, and his voice would not come right. It ran a mile an hour at us, and it lay down on the grass. I never in my life, I never once. It's not a miracle, Otta said. It's a fire with nothing left to eat. A hungry thing dies same as any other when you starve it. That's all the sheep ever did. They took its supper away before it got here. Hold the line, Ada said, quiet now, moving down it with her crook. It's not out. It's only lain down. Walk it all night, and don't a man of you leave till the sun shows me there's no red left in it. Hold the line. Deer came up beside her in the dark, his coat gray with ash to the collar. I'll take the north end, he said. The wind could still throw a spark past the furrow up there. It could, Ada said. You've learned something tonight, then. I've learned. I owe a woman I insulted in front of the whole town my house and both my children. He said, Lo, I don't know how a man carries that. He carries it by keeping the line till morning, she said, same as everybody else. Go on to your end, Mr. Deer. The learning keeps till the fire's dead. They held it. And Prairie Ford woke at dawn with its roofs still on, every roof, because a flock of despised woolly sheep had eaten a firebreak that no plow in the county had ever thought to cut. The morning came up gray with smoke and smelling of char for 10 miles in every direction. South of the grazed strip the country was a black waste to the horizon, still smoking. North of it the town stood whole, and the line between the black and the whole ran exactly to the foot along the edge of the shepherd widow's grazed ground, as clean and as plain as a chalk line on a slate, so that a man standing on it could put one boot in the ash and one boot in the living green and see the whole argument of it under his own 2 feet. They came to her one at a time. That was how it went, and Ada had known it would be, if she had let herself think it would be anything. The first was the preacher's wife, who came up the lane at first light with a basket on her arm and a cloth over it, and who had been the loudest of the skirt gathering women at the mercantile, and who stood at the gate now, not knowing what to do with her face. She did not make a speech. To her credit, she did not try. She set the basket down on the gate-post, warm bread by the smell of it and something in a crock, and she looked at Ada and her mouth worked, and what came out was small. I didn't. She started and stopped. We didn't know. About the grass, about what it... She stopped again. There's bread, she said. It's still warm. I've no business bringing you bread. But I baked it, and I didn't know where else. And she put her hand over her mouth and turned and went back down the lane. And Ada let her go without a word, because there was nothing to say to it that would not have been cruel, and she had never once in her life been cruel when she could help it. The men from the mercantile counter came later in the morning, the two who had leaned on the counter and laughed the short, glad laugh. And they came with their hats already in their hands, having learned that much overnight. They stood in her dooryard and shifted their feet. "Ma'am," the elder said, "we come to ask a thing, and we know how it sits, us asking you anything. After ask it," Ada said. "Would you graze it every fall?" he said, all in a rush. "The break. Round the whole town, come the dry time like you had it round your own place? We'd pay you fair. We'd pay you first, ahead of anybody. There's not a man in Prairie Ford this morning that don't know what your woolies did, that we called what we called." He turned his hat around in his hands. "We'd be grateful. We'd be more than grateful. We'd be in your debt, and we'd own it out loud." "I'll graze it," Ada said. "You won't pay me first. You'll pay me the same as any man does honest work, no more and no less, because that's all I ever wanted off this town, and it's all I want now." She looked at the two of them a moment. "But you'll say it out loud. That part I'll take. Not for me. For the next woman that comes into this country with a humble animal and a patient way of keeping ground, and gets laughed off the section line before anybody troubles to look at what she's doing. You'll say it out loud so she doesn't have to earn it in a fire." "We'll say it," the man said. "So help me, we'll say it every fall." And he went, and the look on the elder one's face going was the look of a man who had eaten his own words and found them bitter, and had made up his mind to swallow them all the same. Amos Deer came last. Of course he came last. He was the proudest, and so he had the farthest to walk, and he did not come that first morning at all. He came when the rains had broken. For the rains did break at the very end of that month, a slow gray soaking rain that put the last of the smoke out and ran black off the burned ground in every draw. And after it the burned prairie did what Ada had told the whole town its grass was made to do. It greened. The ash worked down into the ground, and the deep roots woke, and the black waste came up in a haze of new green so tender it hurt to look at, and Ada turned her flock out onto it, onto the very ground the fire had taken, and the ewes grazed the new growth heavy and content, carrying next spring's lambs low and easy. It was there, at her gate, with the flock out on the greened-up burn behind her, that Amos Deer came the last time. He had his 2 children with him, scrubbed and shy and holding to his coat, the boy of 6 and the girl of 4, whose cough had healed. And he had his hat in his hand again, but he held it easy this time, not crushed, and he stood at her gate as a man stands who has thought a long while about what he means to say. "Mrs. Merrick," he said, "I said a thing to you in the store in front of the town. I called your grass a disgrace to look at. I called your flock filthy. I told you to sell them for tallow before you ruined the range for your betters." He turned the hat once in his hands. "There weren't any betters, ma'am. That's the plain of it. There was just you, keeping the ground the right way, patient, all along, while the rest of us grew a fuse and called it fine grass. My children are alive this morning because you didn't sell your sheep for tallow when a proud fool told you to. They're alive because they're children, and children are hard to kill," Ada said. "And because you learned to take telling, Mr. Deer, which is a thing most men your size never learn. I'll give you that. You leaned into 90 sheep in the dark when I told you to, and you didn't argue it once. There's the whole of my good opinion of you, and you earned it in one night, and it's more than most get." The little girl had let go of her father's coat and drifted, as small children do, to the fence, where the old bell ewe had come up to see about the visitors. And she reached her hand through the rail and laid it flat on the ewe's woolly back, and the ewe stood for it, blunt, gentle face, turned, patient as the ground. "Is this the one that ate the fire?" The little girl asked, to nobody, to the ewe, the way small children ask the great questions of the world. "That's the whole flock ate the fire," Otter said. "But she's the one that leads them. The others go where she goes. So I expect she'll take the credit, and I expect she's earned it." "She's soft," the girl said, wondering. "They said she was filthy." "She's soft." "A good many things are soft, child," Otter said, "that folks find it easier to call filthy. You'll learn to tell the difference. It'll take you a lifetime, but you'll learn it." "This town," Deer said, and stopped, and looked at his daughter's hand on the sheep, and started again with his voice gone low. "This town has needed somebody who isn't ashamed of a humble animal and a patient way of keeping ground for a long time. Longer than I've been in it. I'd be honored if you'd let me learn the rest of what you know. And I'd be more honored than that if you'd let me learn it close by." Ada Merrick looked at him a long moment over the fence, at the big proud man gone quiet, and at the boy holding his coat, and at the little girl with her hand flat on the bell ew's back where Ada's own hand had rested 10,000 mornings, and the mark that laughter had left in her all those years began, slowly, to heal over. "Come in, then," she said. "There's bread the preacher's wife will never live down bringing me, and it's better bread than she'll admit to. And you can put those children where I can watch them, and you can start by learning to move a flock without shouting at it." A corner of her mouth moved. "You've got a way to go yet on the shouting." And the supper that night was laid for 4. They stood at the gate a while first, before they went in, the light going gold and easy over the green burn, and the flock scattered peaceful across it. And without either of them making anything of it, his hand came to rest on the old bell ew's back beside hers, the two hands not touching and not needing to, resting together on the warm wool while the ewes grazed heavy toward the spring, and the children called back and forth across the yard. And that was the story of a woman the whole town called filthy and backward, whose humble woolly flock ate the fire that would have taken every roof in Prairie Ford, and who never once asked to be thanked. Tell me in the comments if you enjoyed this one. Thank you.